vision. Chalk in hand, he's on a mission, shaping dreams with precision. Joseph.
Hi everyone, welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today we're going to look at a very interesting story, and that is because here in the UK we don't actually have ID cards. Strange, but very true. And the government has announced that in the future we will be required to have an ID card. I'll tell you more later about that, but right now, let's look at the news story from Sky News, and we're going to read all about ID cards which are coming to the UK. Right, here we have today's story from Sky News, and you can see here it says Starmer to unveil plan for digital ID cards to crack down on illegal immigration. And it says here the so-called Brit card would verify a citizen's right to live and work in the UK. So let's just continue and see what it's saying. Every adult in Britain will require a digital ID card under plans to tackle illegal immigration. Writing for the Daily Telegraph, Sir Keir Starmer said the government would make a new free-of-charge digital ID that would be mandatory for the right to work by the end of Parliament. And then the story continues. The idea behind the Brit card is that it would verify a citizen's right to live and work in the UK. The plans would require anyone starting a new job or renting a home to show the card on a smartphone app, which would then be checked against a central database of those entitled to work and live here. It is hoped that this would reduce the attraction of working in the UK illegally, including for delivery companies. The government says that ID, not idea, will eventually make it simpler to apply for services like driving license, childcare, and welfare. At the moment, workers have to show at least one form of physical ID in the form of documents, but there are concerns within government that these can be faked. French President Emmanuel Macron has repeatedly warned that the lack of ID cards in the UK acts as a major pull factor for channel crossings, as migrants feel they are able to find work in the black economy. Sir Keir will flesh out more details in a speech at the Global Progress Action Summit in London on Friday, when he will argue that relying on migration to plug workforce gaps is not compassionate left-wing politics. And the story continues, just to say how this might work, and also the history of ID cards, which I'm going to explain to you in a moment. The UK has only previously had mandatory ID cards during the war, with the last group scrapped in 1952. And of course, Tony Blair is behind this. He's been pushing for this for a long time. And then they're saying how it would work. And it would be a digital ID on people's phones. And they would also be able to use other services on there as well. It would sit alongside the digital driving license. And a consultation will look at how it could work. But let me tell you just a little bit more about ID cards in the UK. Right, so when I go to open a bank account, I need to show the bank two forms of ID. One is proof of where I live, and the other is photographic ID. Passport is good, um, a work ID, a travel card, if it has my name and photo on there, something they can see is me. That's what I need. In my lifetime, there's never been ID cards here. Part of the reason is because the government, because of its democratic principles, until now, hasn't been allowed to hold a central database with people's pictures, hair color, eye color. This is a very strong democratic principle because they know the mistakes that perhaps have triggered the Second World War. For example, where minorities have been targeted based on their skin color or their eye color. People who protest the introduction of ID cards, they reference the Second World War, where Adolf Hitler created this idea that people of a certain color, a certain nationality, ethnicity, needed to be removed from society. So to stop that happening, the government has a very strong policy of not collecting on any central database things which could be used to discriminate against us. I can see the logic of that, and we're not alone. Some European countries, although they have ID cards, they refuse to capture information like people's religion, um, people's nationality. Even today, if you ask in the UK which nationality, for example, has the most crimes here in the UK, which diversity has the highest crime rate, which skin color, that kind of information won't be available to you because it would look like you're trying to pigeonhole or stereotype a particular group. I mean, the information might be able to be obtained, but it's not the kind of thing we do because when you're in the UK, everyone has a right. Everyone has a right to be treated the same way, regardless of what they look like. Now, of course, there is an argument which says, well, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be like, but it doesn't really work that way in practice anyway. Well, it looks like those days are finished because our Prime Minister has said that he wants to bring in ID cards for everyone. We'll be required to have them on our phones. But I'm not sure we'll need them just yet to open bank accounts. We don't usually use ID cards for that kind of thing, but I'm sure they would be useful. As I mentioned before, we have travel cards. The driving license has a picture on there. So you see, this looks like something radical, but it does threaten some democratic principles, and already there are major protests about how the government may use this information. I don't think the problem is having an ID card. The problem is that most of us are very distrustful of the government. Polls issued this morning suggest that Nigel Farage is well on his way to be our next Prime Minister. The introduction of ID cards, bringing in Nigel Farage, the removal of immigrants, it doesn't sound good. So that's why many people will be protesting against these kinds of things. Well, what do I think personally? Well, I'm not really sure I care. I've never voted, but that in itself is a problem. I really don't care much for politics. Politicians don't listen to me. Why would they listen to an English teacher who's online? I have nothing to say to them. They have nothing to say to me. I see them, I ignore them, and I don't vote. So with this also, I just think, well, it's about trying to be popular. The government is trying to make itself popular by tackling the immigration crisis. But it's only a crisis because some people are protesting and the government wants to stay popular. Did the government really care? Well, if no one protested, probably not. So it's a bit of a storm in a teacup. But either way, it does look like in the near future, I'm going to have an ID card. I don't want one. Maybe I will opt out and just try to carry a paper one if they give me that opportunity. Like all these things that the government brings in, they usually also bring in an opt-out process. I'm sure somebody will have a religious belief that doesn't allow them to have an ID card, and this will probably go to court, and there'll be a big, massive argument, and then we'll all be allowed to opt out if we want. I can see something like that coming because they can't really force us to do this. You might be wondering though, how do you do anything in the UK if you don't have an ID card? Well, we manage quite well. Most of us have passports now, so that really helps. So a digital passport or a digital ID card, in other words, probably would be good, but I just can't see for the moment. And as for me personally, I really, really don't care. And that's probably going to be the attitude of many people. We just think, well, the government can do what it wants as long as it doesn't interfere with me. Right or wrong, I think that's a really good attitude to have. But, well, when the wrong people get into power, I can't complain because, after all, I don't vote. Well, life in the UK here is a little bit hard, but maybe ID cards would make it better. I'd be really interested to hear what you think, because I think Britain and maybe America, we are the only countries that don't have ID cards. Possibly Australia also, I don't know. But it depends how they're used. I don't want to be going to the supermarket to buy my chocolate for my ID card to stop me leaving the supermarket with one of those bleeping scanners to tell me that the doctor says I shouldn't have chocolate. I mean, that's where this is going ultimately, and I don't like that. I want my chocolate protected. That's it from me. Have a nice day. Bye.